Sarah had not expected to cry at Table 9 tonight. She had not expected anything at all from Table 9, because Table 9 was cursed. Every waitress at the Hollow Birch Inn knew it. The corner booth with the cracked leather seat, and the draft that came through the window no matter how many times Harmon stuffed rags into the frame. Nobody good ever sat at Table 9. Drunks sat at Table 9. Men who stared too long sat at Table 9. People who ordered water and bread and left nothing behind except crumbs and disappointment sat at Table 9. But tonight, the man at Table 9 was none of those things. He was enormous. That was the first thing Sarah noticed when she rounded the bar with her tray balanced on one hand. Tall in a way that made the booth look like furniture built for children, broad across the shoulders in a way that said he had carried things heavier than most people could imagine. His dark coat was simple but well made, and his hands, resting on the scarred tabletop, were the hands of someone who had held weapons and was trying very hard to pretend otherwise. He sat alone. No companion, no drink, no warmth in his expression. His jaw was tight. His gaze was fixed on the far wall like he was seeing something that was not there. And beneath the hard set of his mouth, beneath the sheer brutal authority radiating off him like heat from a forge, Sarah could see exhaustion so deep it looked like grief. She did not know who he was. She would learn later, much later, that the man at Table 9 was Cale Morcaine, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the wolf who had ended the Ashenmoor Rebellion by walking into the enemy camp alone and walking out carrying their leader's severed banner. The most feared shifter in 5 generations, a man whose name made seasoned warriors go quiet. But in that moment he was just a tired stranger in a bad booth, and Sarah was just a waitress with aching feet and 12 minutes left on her shift. She approached the table, set down a glass of water without being asked because he looked like he needed it. His eyes moved to her, and the weight of his gaze hit her so hard she nearly stumbled. Gray eyes, the color of winter rivers, sharp and flat, and utterly devoid of anything soft. "Kitchen closes in 15, Sarah said. Her voice came out steady, which she considered a personal miracle. "Can I get you anything?" He looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Whatever is easy." His voice was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested the volume had been turned down deliberately, like he knew what his full voice could do to a room and chose not to. Sarah brought him the lamb stew because it was what was left, and she brought him bread because the bread was good and warm, and she thought he could use something warm. He ate without looking up. She refilled his water once. He did not acknowledge her. She did not expect him to. When he left, the booth was empty. The plate was clean. There was no money on the table. Sarah stared at the bare tabletop and felt the tiredness hit her all at once, 12 hours on her feet. A split shift she had picked up because Lita called in sick again. 3 tables that had stiffed her already tonight. And now this. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry over a stranger who could not be bothered to leave 50 coppers on a table. She picked up the plate. Beneath it, folded once, was a piece of paper. Thick, cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost more than her weekly wage. She unfolded it with numb fingers. 2 words, written in a hand so precise it looked like it had been trained into the bones. Sarah Voss. Her name. Her full name. A name she had not spoken aloud to anyone in this village. A name she had buried 3 years ago when she left the capital with nothing but a stolen coat and a half-healed scar beneath her collarbone. The paper trembled in her hands. She looked toward the door, but the stranger was already gone. The night air pushed through the gap in the frame, cold and empty and carrying nothing but silence. Sarah stood alone in the dim light of the Hollow Birch Inn, holding a dead name written by a man she had never met, and felt the first crack of real fear open in her chest. How did he know? The question followed her home through the frozen streets. She pulled her coat tighter and walked faster, her breath making small ghosts in the air, but the question kept pace. It pressed against her ribs as she locked the door to her rented room above the tanner's shop, checked the window latch, then checked it again. Sarah Voss was not the name she used here. Here she was, Sarah Linwood. An orphan, a nobody, a waitress who had drifted into the village of Briarfell 2 years ago and never drifted out. She had no family, no connections, no reason for anyone in any position of power to look twice at her. She was invisible, and she had worked very hard to become so. Sarah Voss, on the other hand, had a past, a dangerous one. The kind of past that left scars under collarbones and made a woman run so far north the accent changed around her. The kind of past that involved rooms she should never have entered, conversations she should never have overheard, and people who made sure that witnesses did not remain witnesses for long. She had buried that name beside a river crossing 200 miles south, the night she cut her hair short, and changed the way she walked, and told herself that Sarah Voss was dead. And now a stranger had dug it up and left it under a plate like a calling card. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark with the note clutched in her fist and waited for something terrible to happen. At dawn, something knocked on her door. The knock came twice more before Sarah moved. She had been sitting on the edge of her bed for the last hour, fully dressed, boots laced, the note tucked into her bodice against her skin. She had considered running, had considered it seriously, practically, had mentally catalogued the contents of her pack, and estimated how far she could get before the snow deepened past her knees on the northern road. But she had run before. 3 years ago, and the running had brought her here. And here the running had apparently ended because somehow the past had found her anyway. She opened the door. A woman stood in the corridor. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a dark traveling cloak that looked expensive in the way that expensive things looked when you had enough money to stop caring about appearances. Her face was lined but striking, angular, the kind of face that had probably been beautiful once and had settled into something more useful: authority. "Miss Linwood," the woman said. Not a question. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "My name is Thessaly Wren. I serve as chief counsel to the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." Sarah's stomach dropped through the floor. "I would like to speak with you," Thessaly continued, calm as still water. "May I come inside?" Sarah considered slamming the door, but the woman's gaze was steady, not hostile, and something about the way she held herself suggested she had anticipated the impulse and was prepared to wait it out. Sarah stepped aside. Thessaly entered the small room, glanced at the single chair, the narrow bed, the cracked basin on the shelf, and chose to remain standing. "You served the king his meal last night," Thessaly said. "Is that what he was?" Sarah managed. Her throat felt like sand. Thessaly's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That is what he is. Did anything unusual happen during the meal?" Sarah frowned. "He did not leave a tip." The look Thessaly gave her was unreadable. "Anything else?" "He left a note with my real name on it, a name I have not used in 3 years." She paused. "How did he know it?" Thessaly did not answer the question. Instead, she asked, "Did you notice anything about the king's behavior? Anything that seemed off?" Sarah thought back. The exhaustion carved into his face, the way his eyes had gone unfocused between bites, like consciousness was something he was gripping by his fingernails. The moment, brief and barely perceptible, when his head had dipped forward over his plate and he had caught himself with a sharp inhale. "He looked tired," Sarah said carefully. Something shifted behind Thessaly's eyes. "Tired," she repeated. "Yes, that is one word for it." A silence opened between them, dense and charged. "The king slept last night," Thessaly said quietly. "For the first time in 14 months, he slept. 4 uninterrupted hours. He has not managed more than a few minutes at a time since the Ashenmore Rebellion. Every healer, every herb, every remedy in the northern territories has failed. Her gaze locked onto Sarah. Last night he sat across a table from you for 40 minutes. And then he slept. Sarah stared at her. You think that had something to do with me? The king thinks that had something to do with you. That is insane. Perhaps, which is why we need to test it. The king is requesting your presence at the warden's lodge this evening. Requesting, Sarah repeated. He is the king, Thessaly said mildly. His requests are somewhat flexible in their interpretation. Sarah's mind raced. And the note? My name? Thessaly moved toward the door. The king has resources. He knew who you were before he entered the inn. That is not the question that should concern you. Then what is? Thessaly paused at the threshold. The question is why he came to find you in the first place. And that, Miss Voss, is something even I do not know. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Sarah sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories had walked into a roadside inn in a village so small it did not appear on most maps, sat in the worst booth in the house, and somehow slept for the first time in over a year. And he had known her name, her real name, the name she had killed. She pulled the note out and read it again. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, the letters formed with the kind of discipline that came from years of signing orders and treaties. This was not a man who wrote things carelessly. Every stroke was intentional, which meant the note was not an afterthought. He had come to the inn with it already written. He had sat across from her for 40 minutes, eaten his stew, and waited. Then he had left her name beneath a plate like a message thrown into the wreckage of her carefully constructed anonymity. She should run. Every instinct screamed it. The scar beneath her collarbone throbbed in agreement, a phantom reminder of what happened when powerful people took an interest in her existence. But beneath the fear, quieter and far more dangerous, something else stirred. Something that pulled toward the memory of gray eyes and a voice turned deliberately low. Something that whispered against all reason and self-preservation that maybe this time the powerful person who had found her was not the one she needed to run from. She told herself she was going because she had no choice. She told herself a king's request was a command, regardless of how politely it was phrased. She told herself all of this, and none of it explained why her hands stopped shaking the moment she decided to go. That evening, Sarah walked to the warden's lodge on the edge of the village. Each step felt heavier than the last. The warden's lodge was not a lodge. It was a fortress disguised as one, a sprawling stone building set into the hillside where the village ended and the forest began. Sarah had walked past it 100 times and never given it a second glance, but now lanterns burned in every window, and two men flanked the entrance wearing expressions that said they were not accustomed to opening doors for waitresses. Thessaly met her inside the entrance hall. "Thank you for coming." "I do not recall being given a choice," Sarah replied. Thessaly's mouth did that almost smile again. "Follow me." She was led down a corridor lined with old maps and hunting trophies, through a heavy oak door, and into a room that smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something underneath both that made the hair on her arms stand up. A scent she could not name, but that her body recognized before her mind caught up. Warm and deep and achingly familiar, despite belonging to a stranger. Cale Morcaine sat behind a wide desk, a stack of dispatches spread before him, a pen in his hand. He did not look up when they entered. The bruised hollows beneath his eyes looked worse in lamplight, carved deeper, like someone had taken a chisel to his face while he was not looking. "Miss Voss," Thessaly announced, "as you requested, Your Majesty." Sarah flinched at the name. Hearing it spoken aloud in a room with strangers felt like having a wound reopened. The king raised his head. Those gray eyes found hers, and the impact stole the breath from her lungs. Not anger, not suspicion. Something worse. something that looked like recognition, the kind that went deeper than names and faces, and it terrified her. "Sit," he said. There was a chair along the wall, positioned far enough from the desk to be clearly separated from the business of ruling, and close enough to the hearth to suggest someone had thought about her comfort. Sarah sat. Her hands found each other in her lap and held on. The king returned to his dispatches. Thessaly took a seat near the door, pulled out a leather journal, and began writing as if nothing unusual was happening. A young officer entered with reports, spoke in clipped tones, and left. Then another came. The king read, annotated, issued orders in that same low voice. He did not look at Sarah again. 20 minutes passed. Sarah counted them by the clock on the mantel, each tick a small detonation in the silence. Then his pen hesitated. A pause so brief she would have missed it if she had not been watching him, with the focus of a woman trying to understand why her pulse would not slow down. He blinked, frowned, pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose like he was fighting something. 5 more minutes. His writing slowed. The pen drifted to a stop mid-word. His head dipped forward just slightly, and his eyes stayed closed a beat too long. Thessaly had stopped writing. Sarah could feel the woman's attention sharpening from across the room, though she did not dare look away from the king. Cale Morcane's head dipped again. His hand went slack. The pen rolled from his fingers and came to rest against the edge of a dispatch. His breathing changed, deepened. The rigid architecture of his posture softened 1 degree at a time, like a structure giving way from the inside. His eyes closed, and this time they did not reopen. He was asleep. Sarah sat motionless, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might shatter whatever fragile thing had taken hold. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. The most dangerous man in the Northern Territories slept at his desk like an exhausted child, and Sarah watched the tension drain from his face and felt something crack open inside her chest that she did not have a name for. An hour passed, then 2. Thessaly rose silently, gathered the dispatches from beneath the king's slack hands with the practiced care of someone who had done this before, though her expression said she had never done it like this, not for this long. She caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Do not move." Sarah did not move. Her back ached. Her legs had gone numb. She watched the king sleep and wondered what it meant that a man who could not close his eyes for 14 months had shut them in a room with her. In the 3rd hour, his breathing hitched. A small sound escaped his throat, low and raw, and his fingers curled against the desktop. The muscles in his jaw tightened. His brow creased. A nightmare. Even in this stolen sleep, something was hunting him. Sarah rose from the chair, crossed the 3 steps to his desk, and placed her hand over his clenched fist. His fingers loosened immediately. His breathing steadied, deepened, and he sank back into whatever peace her proximity had given him. She pulled her hand away slowly and returned to her chair, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Thessaly was watching her from the doorway with an expression that hovered between wonder and something much colder. Calculation. "He wakes within minutes of your departure," Thessaly said, her voice barely above a breath. "Every time, without exception. You leave, and whatever holds him under releases its grip. I need you to come back tomorrow night, and the night after that." "For how long?" Sarah whispered. Thessaly did not answer. She held the door open and waited. Sarah stepped into the corridor on shaking legs. The cold air hit her like a wall, and she gulped it in, trying to steady herself. She made it halfway down the hall before the question she should have asked first caught up with her. He had known her name before he ever walked into the inn. He had come to Briarfell looking for her specifically. But how? How could anyone know that a nobody waitress in a frozen village would be the one thing that let an insomniac king close his eyes? Unless she was not a nobody at all. She had run from the capital 3 years ago because powerful people wanted her dead. She had assumed it was because of what she had seen. But what if it was because of what she was? The kind of wolf whose blood carried something old and rare. Something that could reach through a curse and quiet whatever screamed inside a broken king. A routine took hold over the following week, though routine was too gentle a word for something that rearranged her entire life without asking permission. Every evening after her shift at the inn, Sarah walked to the lodge. A guard opened the door without a word. She climbed the corridor to the king's study, took her seat by the hearth, and stayed. Some nights the room was full with officers and advisors, their voices low, their glances at Sarah ranging from curious to hostile, to carefully blank. She learned to ignore them, to fold her hands and breathe and wait. Some nights it was just the king. Those were harder, because without the buffer of other people, the room shrank. The silence thickened. She became acutely aware of the sound of his pen, the shift of his weight in the chair, the way lamplight caught the sharp line of his jaw when he turned his head. She noticed things she had no business noticing. The scar along his left forearm, pale and raised, the way he rolled his shoulders when they tightened, a slow, unconscious movement that made the fabric of his shirt pull across his back. The fact that he drank his tea black and never finished it. He did not speak to her. Not once in the first 5 nights. He worked, she sat, and at some point his body surrendered to whatever strange mercy she carried, and he slept. She stayed until Thessaly touched her shoulder and nodded toward the door. Then she left, and he woke. It should have felt clinical, a transaction, her presence for his rest, but it did not feel clinical. It felt intimate in a way that made her skin hum. She was watching a man at his most vulnerable, night after night, and she could feel the weight of that privilege settling into her bones. On the 6th night, something changed. She was mending a tear in her cloak, and she hummed without thinking. A melody from somewhere old, something Mistress Orla at the inn sang while she kneaded bread. The king's pen stopped. Sarah caught herself and went silent. "Sorry," she murmured. "No," he said. It was the first word he had spoken directly to her in 6 days. "Continue, if you wish." He fell asleep with his head on his arms, his face turned toward her, and something about the way sleep softened the hard mask of command made her chest ache, with a tenderness that had no right to exist. In the morning, she arrived at the inn to find a package on the kitchen step. A cloak. Heavy dark wool lined with soft fur at the collar. No note. No name. Sarah held it against her chest and told herself the warmth spreading through her was just the fur. 2 nights later, the fire in his study had been built higher than usual, stoked before she arrived, the chair repositioned closer to the warmth. She said nothing. He said nothing. But she noticed the way his gaze flickered to her when she settled in. Checking. On the 9th night, he spoke again. "The stew," he said, out of nowhere. "At the inn. You brought it because it was what remained, or because you chose it?" "It was what we had," she said. A pause. "It was good. I will tell the cook. She will be thrilled." Her confidence has been suffering since a merchant told her the broth tasted like bath water. He looked up, and for the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. The suggestion that somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the authority, there was a man who remembered how to find things funny. "Bathwater," he repeated. Her words, not mine. She threw a ladle at his head. "Did she hit him?" "She is a cook, Your Majesty. Her aim is impeccable." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Not yet. But the place where a smile would begin if it were given permission. Sarah's heart did something dangerous. After that, the words came in small pieces. He asked about the inn, about the village, and Sarah answered. She told him about Harmon, the innkeeper, who believed the building was haunted by the ghost of his late wife, even though the noises were clearly a family of raccoons in the attic. One night, Deep into the second week, Sarah woke from a light doze to find the room silent and dark. The fire had burned to embers. The king was asleep at his desk, but something was wrong. His breathing was ragged. Short, sharp pulls of air through clenched teeth. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, and a low sound came from his throat, animal and raw and full of a pain that made her stomach turn. Sarah crossed to him without thinking. "Your Majesty," she whispered, reaching for his shoulder. The moment her hand made contact, the room vanished. Cold hit her first, then silence. Then the smell of iron and wet stone, and something underneath both that was older and worse. She stood in darkness so complete it had weight, pressing against her from every direction. Something enormous moved in the dark ahead, slow, dragging, and when it breathed, the ground vibrated like the chest of a sleeping beast the size of a mountain. She found him standing 10 paces ahead, rigid, staring into the dark. His face was blank, not calm, blank. Like whatever lived behind his eyes had been scraped away. Figures surrounded them, shapes pressed at the edge of perception, murmuring in voices too low to understand, and the grief pouring off the king hit her in waves so thick she nearly choked. Sarah grabbed his hand and pulled. The darkness resisted, clung to them like something alive, but she pulled harder, and the world lurched, and she was gasping in the firelit study with her hand on the king's arm. He was still asleep, breathing steady, face peaceful. Sarah backed away, her legs trembling. That was not a dream. Dreams do not have temperature. Dreams do not smell like iron. She had been inside his nightmare, inside the thing that kept him awake for 14 months. And whatever lived in that darkness, it was not just memory. It was aware. It had felt her there. And just before she pulled free, she had felt it turn its attention toward her, patient, curious, hungry. Sarah sat in her chair until dawn, wide awake, and did not close her eyes once. Sarah did not tell Thessaly about the dark place. She considered it, stood in the corridor the next morning with the words sitting on her tongue like stones, ready to drop. But something held her back. It was the look on the king's face when she had found him inside that darkness, the blankness, the resignation. Like a man who had been drowning for so long he had stopped lifting his arms. If she told Thessaly, Thessaly would tell the king. And if the king knew Sarah had followed him into that place, he might decide her presence was no longer worth the risk. So she kept quiet. She went back to the inn for her morning shift, smiled at Harmon, poured ale for the regulars, scrubbed tables until her knuckles were raw. And when evening came, she walked to the lodge as though nothing had changed. But something had changed. She could feel it in the way her skin hummed with awareness from the moment she crossed the threshold, every nerve tuned to his presence like a compass swinging north. She could sense his breathing, his heartbeat, the precise distance between his body and hers. It had not been like this before. Before, his presence had been heavy, magnetic, uncomfortable. Now it was something else. A thread pulled taut between them, vibrating with a frequency she did not understand but could no longer ignore. Cale looked up when she entered. That was new. Usually he kept his head down, maintained the polite fiction that her arrival was unremarkable. But tonight, his gaze found her immediately, tracked her across the room, and lingered on her face with an intensity that made the blood rise in her cheeks. "You did not sleep," he said. "I slept fine. Your hands are shaking." She pressed them flat against her thighs. "It is cold outside." He watched her for another moment, something working behind his expression, and then returned to his dispatches. But the silence between them had a different texture now. Charged, uneasy, like standing in an open field before a storm, the sky green at the edges, the wind holding its breath. Sarah tried to focus on the mending she had brought. Her needle moved through fabric, but her thoughts kept circling back to the dark place, to the figures she had felt pressing at the edges of perception, to the thing that had breathed beneath the ground like a buried leviathan, and to the hunger she had felt turning toward her as she pulled herself free. She had not imagined it. She was certain of that now. Whatever lived inside the king's sleeplessness was not a nightmare, and not a memory. It was something else entirely, something that had noticed her, and she had the terrible, bone-deep feeling that it had not forgotten. The king fell asleep an hour after she arrived. She watched his head dip, watched his spine yield one vertebra at a time until his forehead came to rest on his folded arms. His breathing steadied. The fire crackled. The room was warm and golden and safe. But Sarah could not relax. She sat rigid in her chair, watching him, waiting for the moment his breathing would change. The nightmare came just past midnight. The shift was subtle at first. A hitch in his breathing, a twitch of his fingers against the desktop. Then his jaw clenched, and a low groan climbed out of his chest, and his hands curled into fists so tight the tendons stood out like wires. Sarah was on her feet before she could think. She crossed to him, placed both hands on his shoulders, and held on. The room did not vanish this time. She could feel the dark place tugging at the edges of her perception, could smell iron and wet stone leaking through the cracks, but it did not take her. Her hands seemed to hold the membrane in place, keeping whatever was on the other side from breaking through. The king's body relaxed beneath her palms. His breathing steadied. The nightmare released its grip, and he sank back into deep, peaceful sleep. Sarah stood behind him with her hands on his shoulders until dawn. Her arms ached, her back screamed, her legs went numb below the knee. But every time she so much as lifted a finger, his breathing stuttered and the darkness pressed closer. So she stayed. At dawn, she heard his breathing change again, lighter this time, rising toward consciousness. She pulled her hands away and retreated to her chair just as his eyes opened. He sat up slowly, blinking, disoriented. He looked at his desk, at the cold fire, at Sarah in her chair, her face composed, her hands folded, every line of her body screaming casual ease, while her arms trembled with exhaustion beneath her sleeves. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "A good while," she said carefully. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or relief so profound it did not know what expression to wear. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then he said, "You should go. Rest." Sarah stood, and the room tilted slightly. She gripped the arm of the chair. "Are you all right?" the king asked, and the sharpness in his voice startled her. He was on his feet, one hand extended toward her, stopping just short of contact. "Fine," she said. "Just stiff. Long night." He studied her face for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through the composure to the fear beneath it. But he did not press. He lowered his hand and stepped back. "Tomorrow evening," he said. Not a request. "Tomorrow evening," she confirmed. She made it to the corridor before her legs buckled. She caught herself against the wall, breathing hard, and pressed her forehead against the cold stone. There was something inside that darkness, something old and patient and aware, feeding on the king's guilt like a parasite buried in a wound. And now it knew she existed. 3 weeks in, Sarah understood the shape of the thing killing the king. Every night she sat with him, and every night the nightmares came, and every night her touch pulled him back from the edge. She had become skilled at reading the signs, the shift in his breathing, the twitch of his jaw, the way his fingers curled inward. She could catch it early now, could press her hand to his shoulder before the nightmare took hold, and the contact was enough to dissolve it. But it was getting harder. Each night the darkness pressed closer to the surface. It was like holding a door shut against a rising flood, and every night the water rose another inch. She had also become skilled at reading Kale, which was an entirely different kind of problem. He was not what she had expected. The rumors painted him as a war machine, a tactical mind wrapped in muscle and fury, a man who had burned his capacity for tenderness on the battlefield and had nothing left but command. And there was truth in that. He was precise. He was exacting. But underneath the discipline, there was a man who remembered to have the fire stoked before she arrived, who asked once, almost inaudibly, whether she preferred her tea with honey or without, and then said nothing when a jar of honey appeared on the mantel the next evening, who caught her yawning at midnight and told her, in a voice stripped of all command, that she could close her eyes if she wanted, that he would be fine. She did not close her eyes, but the fact that he had offered cracked something open in her that she could not seal shut. The words came more freely now. Not conversations, not really. Fragments exchanged across the fire-lit distance between his desk and her chair. "Harmon believes the inn is haunted," she told him one night. "He has started leaving offerings on the windowsill. Small cakes, cups of milk." Offerings for what? His late wife's spirit, supposedly. Though I have it on good authority that the noises are a family of pine martens living in the rafters. You have not told him? The pine martens are eating very well. It seems cruel to intervene. Silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, a breath released through his nose, sharp and brief, the kind of sound a man makes when he is amused and does not want to be. He asked about what grew in the kitchen garden behind the tanner's shop. "Mostly weeds," she admitted. "I planted herbs last spring, but the soil is poor and the light is worse." "Which herbs?" "Lavender, chamomile, valerian root. Things that help people sleep." She caught herself a beat too late and felt the heat flood her neck. He did not comment. But the next evening, a small canvas pouch sat on the mantel beside the honey jar. Inside were seeds, high-altitude lavender, the kind that grew in the rocky soil of the northern passes where nothing else survived. Sarah held the pouch in her palm and did not cry. She did not cry because crying was absurd, and because he was sitting 5 feet away, reading a dispatch, and because she was not going to fall apart over a pouch of seeds, from a man who probably did not even realize what the gesture meant. She was failing at all of this, at keeping her distance, at maintaining the clinical detachment that this arrangement demanded. Every small kindness he offered pulled the thread between them tighter, until she could feel the vibration of it in her teeth. And her wolf, dormant her entire life, a quiet presence she had almost forgotten existed, was waking up. A prickling beneath her skin when she was near him, then something louder, a low, insistent pressure behind her ribs, pushing her toward him. She found herself breathing deeper when she entered his study, pulling his scent into her lungs like medicine. She did not know what it meant. Or rather, she knew exactly what it meant, and was refusing to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it would change everything. Then one night, the nightmare came faster than she could catch it. The king made a sound that ripped her out of sleep, a howl, not human, not quite wolf. Something caught between the two. Sarah lunged and grabbed his arm. The dark place seized her instantly. She was standing in the blackness again, but this time the figures were not at the edges. They were close, surrounding the king in a tight circle, their mouths open, screaming. Cale stood in the center, his head bowed, letting them scream at him, absorbing every accusation like a man who believed he deserved it. And beneath it, underneath the ground, the enormous thing breathed, and the breath carried a voice. "He stays," it said. "He chose this. He will always choose this." Sarah seized his hand and pulled. The world cracked. Light flooded in. She was gasping on the floor of his study, his hand locked in hers. The king was awake, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that bypassed language entirely and landed somewhere in the marrow. "You were there," he said. "You were inside it. Yes. I have been there before. Twice now. The color drained from his face. He pulled his hand free and put the desk between them. Why did you not tell me? Because you would have sent me away. Yes. That is exactly what I am going to do. If I leave, you will not sleep. Then I will not sleep. His jaw was rigid. What lives in that place is not something I will allow to touch you. It has already touched me. Sending me away does not change that. Go, he said. Kale. His name in her mouth made him flinch. She had never used it before. It had always been Your Majesty, the safe distance of a title. Leave, he said. Do not come back. Sarah left. She walked home through the frozen streets with her fists clenched and her eyes burning. By the time she reached her room, the anger had thinned enough for the truth to press through. The king's absence already hurt, already ached, deep in her chest, like a bruise on bone. She had known the man for less than a month, and somehow his presence had woven itself into the architecture of her body so thoroughly that removing it felt like pulling out a load-bearing wall. Her wolf howled, silent, furious, clawing at her ribs from the inside. Sarah closed her eyes and did not sleep. She lasted 4 days. 4 days of going to the inn, pouring drinks, wiping tables, smiling at customers whose faces she could barely see through the fog that had settled behind her eyes. 4 days of headaches that started at her temples and spread until her entire skull felt like a cracked bell. 4 days of her wolf pacing and snarling and scratching at the walls of her chest like an animal in a cage too small. She could feel him. That was the worst part. Despite the distance, despite the dismissal, she could feel Kale Morcane like a second pulse beating beside her own, faint and irregular and wrong. He was not sleeping. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. He was back in the dark place every night, alone, with no one to pull him out. And whatever lived there was getting stronger. On the second day, Harmon asked if she was ill. She told him she was fine. On the third day, Mistress Orla found her sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the wall, unable to remember how she had gotten there. You are burning up, child. I am fine. You are sitting on my kitchen floor at noon with your shoes on the wrong feet. Sarah looked down. Her shoes were, in fact, on the wrong feet. On the fourth day, Thessaly appeared at the inn. He has not slept in 96 hours. Sarah's hands tightened around the tray she was carrying. He told me to leave. He is a fool. He is the king. He can be both. Thessaly studied her face. You look terrible. Thank you. It is a bond, Miss Voss. An incomplete one, still forming, but real enough that separation is causing you both physical harm. She paused. You know this already. Sarah did know. Had known since the night her wolf woke up, since the thread between them pulled tight enough to sing, since the moment she realized that the ache in her chest was not loneliness but withdrawal. He will not accept my help, Sarah said. He thinks he is protecting me. He thinks he is protecting everyone. It is his most consistent flaw. He would rather destroy himself than risk harming someone he... She stopped herself, recalibrated. Someone in his care. The unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. Sarah felt its weight settle across her shoulders. What do you want me to do? Sarah asked. I want you to come back tonight. I will handle access to the lodge. I will handle the guards. But I cannot handle him. Thessaly met her eyes. That part is yours. That evening, Sarah walked to the lodge for the last time as a guest. The guards opened the doors without a word. She climbed the corridor she had walked so many times her feet knew the stones, past the old maps and the mounted antlers and the heavy oak door. She pushed it open. The study was dark. The fire had not been lit. The dispatches on the desk were untouched, scattered across the surface in a disorder that looked wrong coming from a man who organized his world with military precision. The honey jar still sat on the mantel. The chair by the hearth still held the indentation of her body. Cale stood at the window, his back to the room, his silhouette cut sharp against the night sky. He did not turn when the door opened, but she saw his spine go rigid, saw his hands clench at his sides. "Thessaly," he said flatly. "Sarah," she corrected. He turned. 4 days without sleep had hollowed him out. The shadows beneath his eyes had deepened into bruises. His cheekbones stood out like ridgelines. He looked like a man fighting a war inside his own body and losing. But his eyes were not angry. They were devastated. "I told you not to come back." "I know." She stepped inside and closed the door. "I will leave if you look me in the eye and tell me you do not want me here." "I do not," he started. "The truth. Not the noble version. Not the kingly version." She stopped 3 feet from him. "I can feel you. Through whatever this thing is between us. I can feel that you have not slept. I can feel the dark place pulling at you. And I can feel that being away from me hurts you the same way being away from you hurts me." Something broke behind his eyes. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me about the Hollow. Tell me what happened at Ashenmoor." His composure crumbled in stages, like a dam cracking under pressure. A rogue pack on the eastern border, their alpha, Drustin Fell, had been raiding settlements for 2 years. I tried negotiation. He wanted territory I could not give without displacing thousands. He paused, gripping the windowsill like it was the only thing holding him upright. There was a siege, 3 days in the mountains. On the 2nd day, a girl came running toward our line. She was carrying a white scarf. She was trying to surrender. Someone on our line panicked. An arrow was loosed before I could give the order to hold. Sarah's heart clenched. Her name was Elspeth. She was 15. After the battle, Drustin's mother found me. A woman named Vielle Fell. She had the old blood. She cursed me with her dying breath. Told me the dead would find me every time I closed my eyes. "And they do," Sarah whispered. "Every night. Every night. The Hollow takes me there, and they are waiting, and Elspeth is always at the front, and she always asks me why I did not save her." Sarah closed the distance and took his face in her hands. He flinched but did not pull away. That curse should not still be this strong. Blood curses weaken over time. They fade, unless something is feeding them. His eyes met hers. "Your guilt," she breathed. "You are feeding it yourself. You believe you deserve it. And it grows stronger because you will not let it go." He said nothing, which was confirmation enough. "I am not leaving," she said. "Whatever this bond is, it is real, and I am done pretending it is not." His forehead dropped against hers. "If you stay, I cannot promise the Hollow will not take you. I was never safe. I have been running my entire life. I am tired of running." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding himself together with discipline and duty for 14 months and had finally run out of both. His hands found her face, her hair, the curve of her jaw, holding on like she was the last solid thing in a world that had come apart at the seams. And when she kissed him back, the sound he made against her lips was so broken and relieved, it nearly brought her to her knees. They stood like that for a long time, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air, letting the bond settle between them like something that had always been there and was only now being acknowledged. His arms wrapped around her and pulled her against his chest, and she felt the shudder that moved through his entire body when he finally stopped fighting it, stopped holding back, stopped pretending he did not need this. "Stay," he said. The word was rough, stripped of all authority, all command. It was not a king's order. It was a man's plea. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. He carried her to the bed in the adjoining chamber because her legs had given out and because the feeling of being held against him, his heartbeat hammering against her cheek, was the single most extraordinary sensation she had ever experienced. They lay down together, and she pressed herself into the curve of his body, her face against his neck, her arm across his chest, and felt the moment his body finally surrendered. His breathing evened out. His muscles released their grip one by one. His arm tightened around her waist, then went heavy, and he slept. Sarah held him and felt the bond settle into her bones. Something fundamental had shifted. Something that could not be undone. She closed her eyes. She should not have closed her eyes, because the moment she did, the darkness was waiting. The darkness was different this time. Before, it had been cold and distant. Now it was close, intimate. It wrapped around her like something that had been waiting for this exact moment with the patience of a predator that knows its prey will come to it eventually. She could feel the bond. Even here, the thread connecting her to Cale hummed against her ribs. She followed it. She found him in a clearing on his knees, his head bowed, his hands pressed flat against the ground. The figures surrounded him, their shapes more defined than before. She could see faces now. Young, old, twisted with grief and accusation. And at the center, directly in front of the king, stood a girl. She was small, 15, maybe younger, with dark hair and wide brown eyes that held no malice, only sadness so deep it had no bottom. A white scarf trailed from her right hand. The left was pressed against a wound that seeped dark red through the fabric of her dress. "Elspeth, you should have seen me," Elspeth said. Her voice was quiet, almost kind, which made it infinitely worse. "A better king would have saved me." Cale did not move. Through the bond, Sarah felt the full force of what was happening inside him. Not resistance, not pain. Agreement. He believed every word. He always had. That was why the curse had never weakened. The spell was not holding him against his will. Some part of him thought this was where he belonged. In the dark. On his knees. Paying a debt he believed could never be paid. The thing beneath the ground breathed, and Sarah felt the vibration in her bones. It was feeding on the guilt he poured into this place every night. The curse was the wound, but his belief was the infection. "You should not be here," Elspeth said to Sarah. "This is his debt." It is not his debt either. He did not loose the arrow. He gave the order that put the archers on the line. He gave the order because Drustan Fell was burning farmsteads and killing families and would not stop. He tried to find another way, and when there was no other way, he did what a king is asked to do, and it cost him everything. The figures stirred. The murmuring shifted, lost its rhythm. Sarah crossed the circle, knelt beside Cale and placed her hand on the back of his neck. He could feel her. His head lifted. His eyes found hers, red-rimmed and raw, and so full of anguish she had to lock her jaw to keep from breaking apart. "You have to let her go. Not because their deaths do not matter. They will always matter. But carrying them here is not honoring them. It is letting the curse use your grief as a weapon against you." "I failed them," he said, and his voice cracked. "You failed one moment in a war that lasted months. One terrible moment you could not have prevented because you are a man, not a god, and men cannot stop arrows that have already been released." Tears tracked down his face. She had never seen him cry, had never imagined that a man this powerful could look so shattered. "I hear her every night. She always asks the same question, and I never have an answer." Sarah looked at Elspeth. The girl was not real, not a ghost. A construct, a projection of everything Cale could not forgive himself for, given a face and a voice, and an endless question. The curse had built her from his guilt. And every night, he answered by agreeing, by kneeling, by staying. "You do not owe her an answer. You owe her the truth." that you are sorry every single day, that her death changed you in ways you will carry forever, but that staying here does not bring her back. It only takes you away from a world that still needs you. She drew a breath that tasted like ash and iron and courage. I need you. I need you in the world, not in this place. I am asking you as the woman who loves you. Please, put this down. You are allowed to put this down. The silence was absolute. The figures stopped murmuring. The thing beneath the ground stopped breathing. Cale looked at Elspeth. The girl looked back, and the sadness in her eyes shifted, softened, became something that was no longer accusation but release. I am sorry, Cale said to her. I will be sorry forever, but I cannot stay here anymore. Elspeth closed her eyes. The white scarf slipped from her fingers and dissolved before it touched the ground. The wound in her chest sealed, and the color returned to her face. And for one brief, impossible second, she smiled. A real smile. The smile of a girl who had finally been allowed to stop hurting. Then she was gone. The figures dissolved one by one, like fog lifting from a valley at dawn. The ground cracked. The thing below made a low, furious groan, the sound of something enormous losing its grip. The darkness fractured. Light bled through, warm and golden. Sarah grabbed Cale's hand. He grabbed hers back. The hollow shattered around them. Sarah opened her eyes. She was in his bed, in his chambers, wrapped in his arms. Dawnlight pressed against the window, pale and real. Cale was awake beside her. His face was wet. His chest heaved with the kind of breathing that follows a long, hard cry, the kind that empties a person out and leaves them lighter for it. Their eyes met, and he smiled. Small, fragile. Cracked at the edges like something newly made that had not yet learned how to hold its shape. Thank you, he whispered. Sarah pressed her forehead against his and felt the bond pulse, warm and golden and complete. You are welcome, she whispered back. But if you ever order me to leave again, I will put salt in your tea and tell Thessaly about the time you fell asleep on a waitress in a roadside inn. He laughed. It was a broken, exhausted, beautiful sound. They held each other in the pale morning light and did not let go. The curse did not die cleanly. Cale still woke in the dark sometimes, reaching for ghosts that were no longer there. The hollow was gone, but the memories it had fed on remained, and memories do not dissolve simply because the prison that held them has been broken. But Sarah was there. Every time he woke, she was there. She held him without speaking, because sometimes the only remedy was the steady pressure of another body beside yours, reminding you that the world was still solid, still warm, still worth being in. He told her about Ashenmore, not all at once, but in pieces, in the small hours when sleep would not come. He told her about the soldiers he had lost and the decisions he wished he could unmake, and the girl with the white scarf whose face he would carry always. And Sarah listened and did not try to fix it, because some things cannot be fixed, they can only be held. The Northern Territories did not know what to make of her. A waitress from a roadside inn, bonded to the Alpha King. The whispers followed her everywhere. Thessaly handled the politics with characteristic efficiency. They will adjust, she told Sarah, or they will answer to me, which historically has been a more compelling motivator. Cale seemed unconcerned with public opinion. I spent 14 months being eaten alive by a curse, he told a counselor who raised the question of appropriate matches. I will marry whoever I please, and you will attend the wedding and bring a gift. Months later, Sarah woke slowly to pale winter light filtering through the windows of their chambers. Cale was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful, his breathing deep and even. One arm was draped across her waist, heavy and warm. No nightmares, no hollow, no darkness pressing at the edges. Sarah watched him for a moment. Then she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his shoulder, light enough not to wake him. She settled back against the pillow, let her eyes drift closed, and slept.